Hello, everyone, and welcome to the American Scouser Fantasy Football Show. My name is Gally, and I'll be the host. And joining me today from somewhere outside of Chicago is Mateusz. Mateusz, how are we doing today?
Doing well, doing well. Thank you for having me.
It's great. So, we're going to jump right into it. Fantasy football is here for those that play it year round. This is the last week in the fatal preparations. Those who are just joining for the first time ever, you're probably figuring out how to fill out a roster and where the players go. In our previous shows, we've talked about the chips. We've talked about some of the strategy around building your first team. We even did our first team reveal review with one of our listeners last week. We'd like to thank BJ again for submitting his team. Mateusz and myself will be sharing our teams a little later in the program, so you'll be able to criticize, critique, and basically just steer clear of what will be the train wreck that is Gally's Galacticos. But before we do that, we'll start every show off this way, I think, for a while, which is about our American Scouser Cup. If you haven't joined yet, please do. The code is on the screen. We can post the link with the invite in the description later when the video goes live. Just head on in, join the American Scouser Cup, and type in the code that's on the screen. We would love to have you in. The cup will be open moving forward, so you can join after the start if you choose, but we'd love to have all the folks in there. We're over 150 members right now, which puts us, I think, 20% higher than last year, which is awesome. So thank you very much to all those that have joined. To anyone else who would like to, or they have friends that would like to, please get them involved and share that away. So, Mateusz, we thought today a good spot to start would be actual positional players. Thought we would do our top threes. So I'm going to start with you, and let's start at the top of the pitch. I find strikers to be an annoyance and a hindrance to Premier League fantasy football because they should be your top gets. They cost a lot of money. They score less points.
Yep.
So, who for you? Who are the top three strikers in the game? If you were building a
if I was building a team right now, and we're talking fantasy, and we're not talking real life
absolutely,
strikers, right? So I think based on what they're priced at, you can't pass up Gabriel Jesus. I feel like that is one of the most nailed on spots in the whole game, aside from Salah and Trent. And then looking down, I think I would like to say both Haaland and Kane, but you could have a little moment where possibly in game week 1 and 2 where you can go with one and then switch to the other, right? So I definitely think that Jesus and then Haaland and Kane. After that, I don't know if there's any forward that I specifically really like, right? Ronaldo's still at 10.5. No idea how that situation is going to go. Ideally, I would love less of Ronaldo, so then more of someone like Rashford will get some more time in the midfield because I like where he's priced. I'm sure we'll get into that. But I think when it comes to forwards, pretty much Jesus, Haaland, and Kane. Biased, I would like Darwin Nunez to, of course, be off to a hot start as well. But we're just not sure how many minutes he's going to get to begin with. Mitrovic is an interesting option as well, just based on how many goals he had last year in the championship. But I know when they came up to the Premier League a few years ago, I was burned by him quite badly. He only scored 3 goals that whole year. So I don't know if I can trust that again. And then so I think that's kind of, we'll have to see what the likes of like Ollie Watkins can do as well. But I think right now, especially I think the easiest choice in the game right now is Gabriel Jesus for his price, and then Haaland and Kane. And kind of it's up to you to decide which one you want to go with.
Yeah, I agree with that very much. I mean, Gabriel Jesus has done something that no fantasy player has done in the last 4 seasons, which is have a higher ownership level right now than Mo Salah. He's over 70% owned in the game. So if you've been living under a rock and haven't paid attention to the preseason, he's basically scored what feels like a hat trick in every match. I think he's had 15 or 16 shots on target and scored 7 goals. There's nothing better than a striker with a point to prove. Maybe the only thing better is one brimming of confidence. And he looks like the young Brazilian kid who showed up at Manchester City ready to replace Sergio Aguero. And I think people forget before Pep got there, he was basically bought to be the future of the club. And Pep almost ran him out of the club along with Aguero day one, and then developed him more as a winger, called him a wide player. And I'm not a big Arteta fan, but I like what Arteta has done here. He's bought hungry players that have a point to prove. And I think anytime you have an attack-minded team like Arsenal and their point central striker is a poacher that can finish, you can't go wrong with that math. So for me, it is Jesus 1. I'm going to say Kane 2. As good as Erling Haaland is, and, we all poked a little fun on Saturday and, made the Lukaku Haaland, pictures and overlaps of each other and the pouting, right? Truth is, the kid is an absolute machine. He's going to score buckets and buckets of goals and score oodles and oodles of fantasy points. But I know who Harry Kane is and what Harry Kane does. And what he does is score goals.
Right.
And I'd still argue there's better chemistry between Kane and Son than any other offensive tandem in the entire Premier League. And it's probably because of how long they played together with little chop and change. So for that, Jesus for the price point and value 1, Kane 2. If you are looking for a player, you mentioned Ronaldo and Rashford, another guy that's had a renaissance of a campaign here in the preseason has been Anthony Martial. If I knew Ronaldo wasn't there, I'd stump it up. And I will say this,
Exactly.
You guys will see our Liverpool colors and hear our Liverpool biases with things like, Shaqiri over the shoulder, or the idea that we want Nunez to, kick on from the start. But when it comes to fantasy, I do overlook that stuff. It's a game that's been made to play. You don't worry about players. I'll put a United player on my team. I'll put a Everton player on my team. I won't put Richarlison on my team because I'm not a big fan of murderers, but I am a fan of fantasy points. So if you were looking for a striker, you could look at Anthony Martial. I'd still hope that Broha gets moved on from Chelsea, because I think at that price point, he would be probably the steal of the entire game. And there's still some rumblings that like a Delap at Man City could move to Southampton, which would give a $4.5 million striker who starts. And, there's just too many of these players that are overpriced. I'm looking at you, Bamford, even Ollie Watkins. It's a scary spot because you don't know exactly how many minutes or exactly what that team's going to operate like from the start.
You know what the interesting thing is, and I was going to ask about Leeds in general today. I felt like maybe we could spend a minute just to talk about them because Bamford is back, right? He's healthy right now. I think if he was $7 million, I think there would be a much bigger conversation to have about bringing back Bamford back on the team. I know it's all just preseason, but I took a look at some highlights. They played Cagliari the other day, and Bamford was playing like he did a few years ago before he got injured. He was just in all the right spots, making the right runs. And so, based on, we're not quite sure how Jesse Marsh's team is going to look, because last year he kind of had to do whatever he could just to save the team, right? So this year, I know with Leeds, oftentimes you don't really look at it defensively. There's some things you need to sacrifice. And so I was going to ask, do you think there's some merit to having some Leeds attackers? Maybe maybe when we get to the midfield we could talk about it. But because if Bamford was 7, I can't say that I wouldn't pass it up and then go with like a Jesus Bamford and then bolster my midfield. So I don't know. I wonder what your take is on the whole Leeds situation, if it's worth to take a look at.
So I'm a little bullish on them. I was someone who picked them to stay up when Jesse Marsh got there. I supported Jesse Marsh getting the job. Leeds wanted to hire the man. They didn't want to hire him then. They wanted to hire him in the summer. That was the plan all along. He fits their mold. I think the players have actually taken to his style. Their numbers and underlying statistics improved extremely. My fear is that Rafinha created a lot of the opportunities, and those opportunities were ultimately there. And what makes me nervous is they bought a replacement in Sinanestri, more of a left winger, which could move Jack Harrison to the right. and I don't know if that suits his game the best. There's still talk of Newcastle coming in for Harrison as well. So could they still have some changes? Let's move to the midfield at this point, and let's start there. Um, this is going to be a Mo Salah less segment. We both know Mo Salah is the top three player. We both know Mo Salah is, in both of our teams, I'm sure. I'm just assuming he's probably going to be the captain most weeks. So let's start with your top premium midfielder outside of Mo Salah. Is there one in your team right now?
No, it's Salah. There was a time where I played around with Son. I think I have a team that I really liked without Salah. But then when I thought about it, it's hard to go against the template week one when you see the percentages that are owned for each player. Week one isn't the week to take risks. You kind of you get the guys that are nailed on for a reason. You get the guys that other managers have for a reason, right? So I don't want to miss a hat trick against Fulham. I just feel like that's one of those things that's going to happen if I don't have in my team. So outside of Salah, I don't have a premium midfielder. I think I like Son. If Son was still a little cheaper like he was last year, I think it'd be a no-brainer. But with the bump up to 12, I know that's been throwing some people off, but he's still owned by a quarter of the managers out there. So I imagine, I don't know if it's a Salah-Son duo or if it's a Salah-less team. Other than that, I think there could be some merit to De Bruyne, especially given the first 6 to 8 weeks of City having some great fixtures. Right, and he does get that extra boost for a clean sheet, and I feel like City will have quite a few of those the first 8 weeks. So I think outside of Salah, I don't have any premium on my team, but I can see some merit to Son or De Bruyne.
Yeah, I really think Kevin De Bruyne is going to have a big year if he stays healthy. We talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
There were moments in the Community Shield on Saturday where it looked like him and Haaland weren't exactly on the same page. It's not like De Bruyne to miss runs. And that makes me question, was it De Bruyne missing runs or was it Haaland not being in the right place? Because to me, De Bruyne is the maestro that pulls all the strings to Pep's orchestra, right? And we know that Pep plays in a way that is so demanding that someone with a 2-cent head like Jack Grealish can't figure it out enough to actually become part of it, because he's a freelancing footballer who wants to get on the playground and make everything happen for himself. And that's not Pep's system. It's methodical, it's movement, it's breakdowns, which I do think is going to take Haaland a little bit of time. One more reason why I really stumped up for Kane really on my first team, as we'll see in a little bit. Where I'm looking in the midfield at some real good value, if it clicks, is like a player like Sterling at 10 million. When Sterling's on his game, he's an absolute machine in fantasy. He picks up assists, he picks up goals, he gets in good spots, he creates, he gets great opportunities, which leads to lots of bonus points. The problem is as soon as he slipped on that blue jersey, you really notice how inefficient Chelsea is in front of goal. They might be the best team in the Premier League at times from the box to the box, but the problem is you win in the last 20 meters, and they don't put the ball in the net. So to pick up a midfielder that's not scoring goals at a team that's going to struggle, in my opinion, to score goals, win a lot of 1-0s, I think 10 million is probably too high. I feel good about Mahrez to start the season for the plain fact that Foden hasn't really played many minutes. I do think that Alvarez will be a star as time goes on at City, but I don't believe that'll happen from day one. So I think Mahrez might be more nailed for minutes than he's ever been. And, until I see someone take a penalty other than him, he's still on penalties.
Right.
He's on set plays. And most people don't know this. He was Manchester City's leading scorer in all competitions last year and scored 24 goals. So the idea that, it was not the Riyad Mahrez that was such a breath of fresh air at Leicester that year, he's really been a success at City. He's just always been part of Pep's roulette. So if you're willing to take that gamble, I think it's there. If you're not willing to take that gamble, we'll just bring in Saka or Mount, because they're both going to play just about every minute of every game.
Or Luis Diaz, who's also at the same price point.
Yep, and I I do think Diaz is a big one, but I also feel like Diaz has a little bit to prove. His preseason's been good. He's electric, but you know, his underlying stats have been amazing since he got to Liverpool. His actual goal involvement, assists, and goals actually hasn't been that high. I think we
Right.
just see the player that he is, and what he's replacing is so big as well. A little pressure on Diaz to start the year, so I'll be interested to see how that goes. As far as we talk about the high end midfielders. I even mentioned some of the mid range and the 8 millions. What about the low end? Who are you looking at from the 4.5 to let's say 6 million range to fill out your roster if you got those heavy hitters up top?
I think where my mind is at right now, I think Pedro Neto is an amazing bargain at 5.5. I think Andres Pereira is a good 4.5 to have. Just even as bench fodder to have a guy like Andres Pereira, who's going to be a big part of Fulham's system, is a nice luxury to have. If we go a little bit more expensive, we're looking at someone like Martinelli. I think I don't think he's in my team right now, but I want him to be in my team. And now that I'm looking at it, I think Martinelli. I think I'd rather do the 6 for Martinelli than do the 8 for Saka. And I think I would be able to find that 2 million and use it elsewhere a little bit more comfortably. So those three other than that, I think Leon Bailey's an interesting one. When he came over from the Bundesliga, I think everyone expected so much, and of course he got hurt. But when he had those little flashes, he looked really good. And so if Leon Bailey can get things going the way that a lot of people wanted him to, then 5 million is really nothing for him. And then lastly, I think Rashford at 6.5. If and it's just a little more than 6, but if Ronaldo doesn't play as much, and if he's not as involved as much, and going back to your Martial point, I think Rashford at 6.5 is also a great deal. A little better than Sancho at 7.5, because this is the cheapest Rashford has ever been, and so having that ability to have a $6.5 million midfield at the level that Rashford is, I think can also open up some flexibility in how you set up your team, just because of his price point. Now, if Ronaldo is there every game, I don't know if that's going to be worth having. So it'll be interesting to see the dynamic the first 3, 4, 5 weeks, see how that goes. But I think those are a few of those little low tier, mid tier midfielders that I like a lot.
Yeah, I like the Neto pick. You'll probably see him, I believe, in my team. The other, I also really like Martinelli. I think Martinelli has the opportunity to take that job and really run with it. Again, he's been playing a lot more centrally, um, cutting inside, and he's been taking up positions in the middle of the pitch. And I think that's only going to lead to a natural goal scorer scoring more goals. I thoroughly believe, as good as Saka is, that Martinelli might have the highest upside of any player on that squad. Like, I think that kid's going to start for Brazil someday and be a big, big talent. And I've said that from the first time I saw him at 18, 19 years old. And I think he's just finding himself now. And I think between himself and even Zinchenko, we'll get to some of the Arsenal defenders in a moment. Arsenal has a great run of fixtures to start the season, especially through, I think, the first 6 or 8 game weeks. They may be the top of the ticker. So I think if you're playing the fixtures, Martinelli makes a lot of sense. I think Lingard, honestly, is a really, really outside shout. Anyone who remembers, the magic that was Lingard at West Ham for those 3 months on loan, where he actually played in that number 10 attacking, creative role. It never made sense for me at United. I mean, albeit for me to not laugh at United not utilizing talent. Um, I know the kid has a 2 cent head, and it seemed like the supporters were just kind of done with him more because of his social media activity than it was what he did on the pitch. But he never really got a chance at making a run in the team. And anytime they had a chance to sell him or move him on, they kept him around. And then they lose him on a free. He takes the huge wages from Forest. But again, this is a player who has a chip on his shoulder, who's, listening to the radios and reading the papers saying that he's not worth this money and what was Forrest doing, that he just took the money. He could have went to West Ham to play in Europe. I mean, he took a pretty big challenge. And if they play the same attack-minded football that they played in the championship, and some of the signings, and I think they've signed an entire new team. But if they gel and they play well for the manager, I can see Lingard scoring a lot of points from that midfield and that attacking role. And at 6 million, that's a nice alternate to Martinelli if you're looking for a differential. If you're looking for someone with a lower ownership, with a high return and upside. The others are the Everton midfielders. I got to be honest.
I forgot about
If, we
Anthony
take
Gordon.
if we take the allegiances out of things, I think Gordon and Gray at 5.5 million are both really intriguing options. I don't know that I would start with them. After week 4, when Lampard's fired, it'll probably look a lot better. But those are both really, really intriguing options for me. Both from the way that they play, from the attack-minded system they're trying to play in, the overlapping wing backs. I think that's an important piece too. Is systems. The old adage in boxing is like, styles make fights, right? Well, styles of systems make fantasy players superior. If Reece James was playing at Burnley in a flat back 4 that didn't go past the halfway line, he wouldn't be Reece James.
Right.
But in a flying wing back system with 3, with a wingback system with 3 solid center backs and 2 holding midfielders, you can press as far forward as you want, and Reece James can arguably be one of the most talented right wingers in the Premier League on his day. So I think that's that whole stylistic area of it. And for me, I think that's how I'm building my midfield. And we're going to transition now to defense, where, to be honest, for me, is probably the most work. It's the hardest right now because I feel like there's some set it and forget it pieces. Let's just do the same thing with Salah. If you don't have Trent in your team, you just don't really like this sport or this game, because it just doesn't make sense, because all he proves every year is he gets better and better at going forward. We're not going to go into how much everyone wants to blame him as a defender, because in fantasy, your defense is actually less important than your activity going forward.
Yeah.
So outside of Trent, give me a high-end defender that you're bullish and excited for this year.
Yep.
And maybe talk to me about one that you think could surprise some folks.
So outside of Trent, I think João Cancelo. I think that is I think as 2 defenders go, I haven't had a team really where I haven't had both Trent and Cancelo. So I like the idea of having those 2 premium defenders, knowing what kind of returns are going to get me. Are there some cheaper defenders that could possibly, only have a 20, 30 point difference? Sure, but I'm not sure which ones those are going to specifically be. So I like João Cancelo when we're looking at that more premium option. City team, you know exactly what you're going to get with him. If Reece James is healthy, and if Reece James plays on the right side and doesn't play right center back, because we don't know if Tuchel's going to kind of shift some things around. Sometimes Reece does play against quicker teams. He tends to play Reece in that right center back role to match any speed. So if Reece does play on that right side, and to your point, like you said, he is one of the best players to have in the game. I like Perisic a lot. I think Tottenham I think they are going to be the 3rd strongest team in the Premier League this year. I think we saw towards the end of last year, Conte was really doing a great job with them. And they got some pieces that work, that makes sense. Perisic going forward is amazing. He sometimes, to the Reece James point, he sometimes plays more like a winger than he does, than a left back, and he's 2-footed. He's probably one of the best 2-footed players in the entire world. And so I think Perisic at 5.5 could be a really good deal. And then another nice deal, I'm looking at it, I'm thinking maybe Zinchenko as well. Especially if Zinchenko plays on the left, he's got that flexibility. He's going to be out on that left side, possibly with Martinelli. I saw a few of their highlights this past week, and it looked like Martinelli and Zinchenko were playing off each other on that left side, which was fun. And there might be times where Zinchenko plays almost in the midfield. So having that flexibility of a midfielder essentially in your team as a defenseman in fantasy is a great luxury to have. And so just another one of those guys that moves forward. Same with Matty Cash at 5.5 million. I think with last year, I think he was the 7th highest point getter from all defenders. And so, he's $2.5 million less than Trent. So if you want to do something without Trent for some reason, then you could essentially have like a team of, let's say you go 5 all the way across, you go 5 to 6 million for each defender. You can have a pretty solid back line there that gives you good returns going forward. and good chances at clean sheets too, which is, it's always good to have those extra 6 points.
Plus, it's always good to put a Polish international on your side.
I see you, Maddie. You're one of us now.
For those who don't know, we at our internal Discord channel, and if you're not in our Discord channel, I don't know what's wrong. Leave a post, ask for an invite. We'll send you a link. But Mateusz is our Polish prince, and he keeps us up to date on everything to do with the Polish national team, including when they, draft in Englishmen who can't make the England team. But I'm going to say I like your Zinchenko pick a lot. He's actually in my side right now. I couldn't agree with you more about what I saw during the Chelsea match regarding him and Martinelli playing well down that left-hand side. Zinchenko was taking up spots. Most people don't know this. Last year, Zinchenko actually created the most opportunities at goal of any player per 90 minutes in the Premier League. Now, he played a lot less time, and he played with a great side, but he created those opportunities. Like, he actually had higher XG numbers than Cancelo, who arguably was the best offensive defender in the Premier League last year. My fear with Cancelo is if they don't sign a left back, he's going to be playing left back instead of right back, where he excels. I'd rather him on the right, cutting in and shooting with his left. So we'll see there. Zinchenko has to add a few goals to his game, but I do think the opportunity to have a 5 million defender in a team with great fixtures that could be an out of position midfielder at times. Most folks forget he was a number 10 when he came up. He's been one of Arteta's favorite players all the way back through the time at City. They were very close. So I don't feel like this was a buy because Kieran Tierney needs backup or someone to motivate him to get into the side. I genuinely believe they bought Zinchenko because they believe he improves their starting 11 in multiple areas. And I think he's going to take up different areas of the pitch and play a little bit more like the City fullbacks, which is inverted and cutting in, which should create some opportunities for long distance shots. And we'll see if he ever gets himself on any of the set pieces when Odegaard's not on the pitch. So for me, the number one defender that never gets talked about on the premium level is Andy Robertson. Because statistically, he gets into spaces that even Trent doesn't get in more often. No player is in the attacking third more as a fullback than Andy Robertson. And part of that is I just think he's got a motor that goes all day. He never takes a minute off. I still, even that header the other day, it's either got to be in the back of the net or thrown back across the middle. I still feel like every time he shoots, he shouldn't. And every time he should, he doesn't. So, I'd really like to see that improve. But I do think that Andy's going to have a huge season. I also love the idea of the fact that, unfortunately for them, he doesn't have to worry about the World Cup. And there'll be a nice little break for him. So I think he doesn't have to have his minutes managed at the beginning, knowing there's a break in the middle. And I think we're going to see that. As much as Tsimikas is coming on, and, that was last year's steal, right? We get the $4 million Liverpool defender that starts week 1. He's a little banged up, which always slows a backup player down because he didn't get as many minutes in the preseason as he should have. Probably why they're playing so many of these extra friendlies is to get these players minutes that couldn't get on the pitch. So it'll be interesting there. Nico is obviously, a Liverpool guy, former Liverpool player. He's at Forest now, priced at $4 million. He's an easy enabler. Let's quickly talk about keepers. For me, the keeper position is a $4.5 million. Sit it and forget it. You'll see in my team, I went with Meslier. I don't know why. I was looking at $4.5 million defenders, and I felt like he ticked the boxes. I'm a little nervous that Raya won't start now that they got Strikowski from Lazio, and that makes me a little bit wary of him. Why would Brentford go and buy a number 1 keeper and an international keeper at that? So we're going to have to see where that one goes. You can stump up for Allison. You can stump up for Ederson. But for me, if you're going to spend that extra $1.5 million, I would be strengthening that in a defender that can also score goals, get you assists, have even more opportunity for bonus points. How are you taking the approach to your keeper to start the season?
I saw the price drop in the keepers as just enticing enough to go for that 5.5 million. So I think the game. I think they priced the keepers down a little bit to make it more interesting and not have to totally be like, okay, well, we're not going to get Allison, Ederson, or Hugo Lloris because they're all at 6 million, and that's just going to be too expensive. So now dropping them down to 5.5, I think it creates an interesting strategy, and you can kind of see based on the ownership percentages that those 5.5 keepers are owned by many teams. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with going 4.5 to 5.5. Ultimately, I think as a keeper, some people will find that perfect one that they will start and sit. Maybe like a Henderson at Force wouldn't be a bad pick at 4.5 too, because that year for Sheffield he was absolutely amazing as well. So we're kind of going to see how that plays out. But yeah, I think in my team, every team I've had besides one, I've done Lloris, just because I don't think I've tried playing around with that extra one elsewhere, and I think I'm still comfortable with what I had in the rest of the team to keep the premium goalkeeper, so to speak. So I think there's enough value at the price point now where I don't think there's a bad decision. There's certain keepers that I wouldn't pick in the same price bracket, like when we're looking at someone like Ramsdale with De Gea, with Martinez. I don't think that De Gea would be my pick between those three at the 5 million spot. So I think there's bad picks within brackets of prices.
Yep.
But I don't think there's a bad price for any keepers this year.
Well, I guess there's no better time than to reveal your team.
Voila. For now.
Quite a bit. You've shown, and we should acknowledge that to all of our viewers and listeners, right? We still have 72 hours or 3 days left to make changes. Friday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you're in Central Time Zone, that's 12:30. But it's one of these things where you have the unlimited transfers. My team will probably change a little bit more, but I do believe I'm about settled on it. We have some very similar squads. You'll see it when I bring mine up. There's probably only 3 or 4 differences. We're both pretty much on the template. I can see you utilized your team in talking points today. I do like the Rashford move. I'd be a little nervous whether or not he actually sees starts at the beginning. You don't have a guy like Ronaldo and sit him on the bench. So I do think Ronaldo will start from the beginning, and I think the money they spent on Sancho requires him to start this season from the rip on the right. And that just leaves one spot for Rashford, Martial, midfield changes. So it'll be interesting to me to see who starts on the left-hand side for them, and if they play a traditional 4-3-3 or if they mix it up. They may play with an extra midfielder. You still have Bruno there, so there's a lot of moving parts with United. I feel like United to wait and see. Because the manager and Ronaldo put such a cloud over them. Yeah. I see you're starting with Matty Cash. I do like that pick. I question whether or not you could find more value, and if maybe that Polish allegiance isn't a little bit jading you a little bit on that.
I like the first.
About Lloris though. I do like Southampton.
Yeah.
I do like Lloris playing Southampton in week 1, and I like Tottenham's fixtures. But Lloris has really had a howler and a mistake in him the last couple seasons. And I just wonder if each year, when is the year that kind of he steps out of being the elite level?
So with Lloris, I think based on how Conte ended the season last year with Tottenham, and like I mentioned earlier, I think they're going to be, I think they're the 3rd best team in the Premier League. And I think that their defensive fortitude is going to show. And I like him at that spot. I feel like maybe it's a boneheaded move not to go with Ali or Ederson at the same price point, but I also feel like Lloris will have more opportunities at a few more saves per game than Ali or Ederson. That's the problem with those two guys, is that they're priced so high and they keep clean sheets, but they don't get that many chances at saves. So they get the most chances at bonus points as other keepers do. So will I keep Lloris before Friday? Maybe. I did a team with Mendy that I really liked as well. I don't know. I have a good feeling about Tottenham this year, and I like where they're at, and I think that's the biggest thing that is kind of what's on my mind when I think about Lloris at that keeper spot.
And how about with the bench? Obviously, you went really light on the bench.
Yeah.
not a lot of investment there. Do you worry a little bit about rotation at times if Rashford's not playing, if Neto sits a match, if Nico doesn't start, like without the playing bench, obviously?
Yeah, I am, and that's why I'm looking at this team again. I have an idea in my head to play around with this a little bit. I feel like I might even want to do a 5-3-1 situation, just because with the value at defenders this year, I like a lot of defenders, and I think there's a couple that I want to look at, like especially if Kyle Walker actually starts for City at 5 million. I think that's a much better pick than Matty Cash, but that's if he'll start. He'll play 25 games in the Prem, full 90 minutes, but then he'll also not even see the field for 13. So it really depends on how much game time he's going to get. So I think with the bench, I don't think Nico Williams and Andres Perez is weak. They're cheaper, but I think there could be some problems. But with the advantage of us having that extra wild card this year, in the first, like that I'm going to use between game week 7 and 9 for the most part, I think that's what I'm going to do. I think I can remedy that there if there needs to be a big change like that.
Great. Any specific moves before we wrap up looking at your team and move on to my team reveal? Any specific moves that you're thinking about making between now and Friday's deadline?
I'm gonna be honest. I don't know if it's just because I was just watching some highlights and I am now super biased, but I really like Aronson over at Leeds. He created so many opportunities for Leeds against Cagliari that I really like him a lot at 5.5. So I think if anything, Aronson coming in the mid would be nice. I might take out Rashford just for the whole Ronaldo situation, seeing that he's back now and he played in the preseason friendly yesterday. So I think if anything, I might move Holland out for Kane for the first week. But yeah, I think I'm pretty set there for now.
All right. Well, thanks, Mateusz. That was great. As you'll see, lots of similar players. We're both on the template with a few different tweaks. I do feel good about this side. Wish I had a little bit more money invested in the bench. I've had different iterations of this where I had at least one bench player that I considered a starter for rotation purposes. And as time went on, I just felt I wasn't investing enough in the premium players at the defensive side of the ball by having that $6.5 or $7 million midfielder sitting on my bench, or even the $5.5 million Everton players instead of the $4.5 to $4 million enablers that I filled my bench with. So I went with Meslier in goal. I like Leeds' set of fixtures. Leeds has looked a little bit more assured at the back. I like the signings they've made, especially, the ones that Jesse Marsch understands and know his system. 3 players coming in from Red Bull. I really think Roca from Bayern Munich might be the steal of the lot for them and the central defensive midfielder role. And if him and Adams mesh well in the double pivot, I think there could be some real opportunities for some additional clean sheets. And to your point before, I think Meslier will have a lot of save points as he is one of the better shot stoppers in the league. Little weak when the ball's in the air, which always makes me nervous. Weak goals being conceded on corners. I'm going with the double Liverpool defense. I love their fixtures to start. I love the 2 players going forward. I think they could be 2 of the top 10 players in Premier League fantasy. I wouldn't be shocked if 3 or 4 of my defenders turn out to be the highest scoring defenders in the game by the end of the year. And I'm really trying to keep a team that I can leave for a while. So I looked at fixtures. Arsenal, Liverpool. I went with clubs and sides that I feel are going to hit the ground running because I feel like they're the most talented sides in the Premier League, especially attacking. And this game is about attacking. As much as clean sheets help, the points are scored when goals and assists are created and bonus points are earned. I have decided to go with Harry Kane from the start. Mo Salah is my captain. I will probably go to Holland in week 2 as my one free transfer. Also getting a chance to watch City play and see how he fits in, where Grealish is playing, and what kind of spots they're taking up early on. So for my bench, it's Andreas, a $4.5 million number 10, a $4 million wingback who likes to go forward. And as a sneaky one, the 4.5 for Greenwood, it was really just an enabler pick from Leeds. But with Bamford's injury problems, the fact they haven't bought a striker, it's really just Greenwood, Gelhardt, and Bamford. And, Jesse Marsh has talked about Greenwood's talent. More importantly, he's talked about all the different areas of the pitch he can play. So if he gets a few extra minutes here or there, I think he's a little bit more versatile and has a little better chance than some of the other $4.5 million strikers. I still really hope, like I said earlier, that Broha gets moved, because I think if Broha got moved, I would make some moves in here. Probably have to sacrifice either Neto or even move Robertson down to, say, James, or even Cancelo down to Diaz. So I think there's some movement, but again, I'll only be moving those players if it means a real improvement somewhere else on the playing side of the pitch. So this is my team. This is how I plan to set up. I do plan to play this formation primarily throughout the year, the 4-4-2. I think in fantasy it offers the most value. As much as I'd like the idea of the 5-4-1 or the 5-3-2, I think this 4-4-2 probably offers the easiest route in to high-end premium players, while also still balancing the squad for potential transfers in specific price points. Specifically, the $8 million midfielder, the anywhere from $4.5 to $6 million defender, and of course, the plug-and-play on the goalkeeper. I wish I had a little money in the bank, honestly. It makes transfers that much easier. But we'll talk more about transfers when we come back for our 5th show next week. Well, that's about going to do it for us this week. Good luck to all the fantasy players out there. For myself and Mateusz, it's been a lot of fun doing our preparations and our team reveals. We can't wait to see all your teams. Feel free to leave comments, questions, share. Don't forget to get in there and subscribe to the channel to get additional American Scouser content. And we will see you all next week with a horror story of how week 1 went.